Thank you for watching. I'm thinking about doing a reaction of some, uh, of not some, of a video that made me think, uh, retro introspectively. This is the video. This is the video. Um, let's watch it.
Factors will matter most for the future and how they're going to differ from the past. What we always try to look at very, very clearly is not just past average rates of change in anything or past average experience, but we try to look very carefully at what the conditions were that were underlying to the trends and changes in the past, and then we have to imagine what the conditions will be in the future in order to have the best possible assumption about what's going to be happening in the future. We know a number of things are going to be happening. They're going to affect the nature of the labor force that will be involved in determining what the output and what the productivity levels are going to be in the.
Because of the declining population, we're gonna have a higher percentage of higher age people in the labor force. Is that how I understand it?
Population very much.
Well, is how I understand it correct?
Remember the changing age distribution of the adult population, increased educational levels of attainment. We've been seeing that. And the implications of this for the domestic supply of workers and the demands for goods and services is going to be substantial. Things will be changing in the future, all of which will have an effect on productivity, that is, output per hour worked on average in our society. Post
So I think in a advanced civilization, especially those that are at cutting edge civilization, I don't think China is there yet. Maybe on purpose, because being cutting edge is, you know what? Should I say this? Am I going to get in trouble? Uh, you gotta keep the USA at the cutting edge, guys, because they can do it. I don't know. The smart people are just there, maybe because of the rewarding system. Um, but also, I think a lot of people don't deserve it in a way that they don't want to submit to morality. At the end of the day, why we have philosophy around? Why do we have morality around? Why don't these philosophers get bullied to death? Or why this? No, I'm not calling for that. Absolutely not. The opposite. It's because these things are real. Yeah, that's
industrial? Are we going to be really moving towards more and more post-industrial so that increased innovation and automation and production is going to be more and more of a factor? There's big questions about infrastructure and replacement of infrastructure in the future. We've done relatively little of that in recent decades, and will there be an increase in that, which would move us back somewhat more towards physical goods production? Technology, another question there is, will the U.S. really be leading in the development of alternative energy? Are we going to really be moving more and more away from fossil fuels, having more development of alternatives, and also biotechnology, genetic-based medicine? Lots of discussion for many, many years now. mRNA for COVID has been a great advance and may have some other positives for us. But are we going to have more of that in the future? And what will that do both in terms of the direct effects on productivity and the work that is done in the economy, but
okay. So if you are infuriated by what I say, think about this. All right, you don't have a format upon what is it to do. Excuse me, my there's a problem I have real quick. What you have now is like the history of what works, and due to technology, I'm not even talking about AI, right? Just computers. Due to technology, there are new things that is going on. Like for example, extreme potential in terms of uh, the improvement of effectiveness and efficiency, and this problem of inclusion in the economy, and also yeah, that makes me think a lot. That makes me think a lot. Uh, And it's now extremely necessary for you guys to be to have gratitude. Extremely important. Um but again, there's the tug of war between good and evil, should I say, but in a more practical sense, the tug of war between conservative and the one that wants to carry it forward. Because maybe what's happening, well, I could estimate that there's this argument that needs to be dealt with, where you would say, if we live in the middle age, right, having middle age technology, just like if you watch Dr. Stone, it is not that bad, you know. Because the stake now that we all want to work on is that, um you know the stake is the misplace of the status quo, which is probably not fair because status quo has been doing it. And arguably speaking, agendas are being challenged. Agendas of prosperity and the ladder, the office or the career ladder of a lot of people, the paradigm of their pension plan is actually involved here, and it's disrupted, but it's disrupted because of technology. But I would argue that if you keep up morality, all right, things, the difficulty that you are looking for, or the concerns needed in order to not be chaotic, okay, is there. Is there. Some people are just loaded. I suspect that some people just load the idea of being a good person. That's the problem, because being good have all of these dimensions of investment, where all of this money could be channeled to, and it all of those could be circuits of economy, to be honest. But it's initially maybe will have to require works that were not only not only requires obsession, I should say, but also requires humbleness, because it's a shift of paradigm. There's a lot of admitting of mistakes probably, and a lot of people don't want to do that. But I would imagine in the cutting edge economy, in the cutting edge technology, you would always be correcting yourself. And a lot of people who are imperative to be negotiated with to make this happen, maybe are not the type of people who would want to be looked at as keep on fixing their mistakes. A lot of people here are embarrassed to came across as one who would make mistakes. That's again another issue where we cannot, where it could be, we require extra resources put in order to break the wall, I guess. I'm being abstract, and you want to say I could be wrong. I don't think I'm wrong, for a reason.
Also, the effect on the quality of the labor force.
However, I wish that people would take me as a person, not as a as a as a million person.
Would be a plus or a minus. Services in the past, obviously, we know that relative to goods production, they are not registering as highly in terms of labor productivity. So, what will be happening in the future about services versus goods production? And of course, aging of the population has a big effect on that. Future of healthcare. One of the things we know that in some other countries like Japan, robotics have been more and more brought into play with big changing age distributions. Will that be the case more and more in this country, and what will the effect on productivity be there? So on the next slide, we do have issues with measuring real growth. And I know there was a Brookings discussion back about 5 years ago, pre-pandemic, about just this. And there was a lot of discussion about the difficulty of actually measuring real growth for the purpose of productivity. Hedonics, quality adjustment, et cetera. One of the difficulties on this really that was pointed out was, for instance, smartphones. Smartphones had, at that point, even 5 years ago, been increasingly doing more and more things for us. And were we, in fact, really quality adjusting the price levels of smartphones to give ample credit for the increasing value of smartphones relative to the price, i.e. productivity? It is not clear. There was much thought by folks at that conference that we were not really doing that. So the bottom line, really, the way this translates into real earnings, as Jim indicated, is critical to the standard of living, but more specifically for Social Security projections, the wage growth versus price growth is really critical. So real growth in earnings and productivity really, really matter. Everybody, I'm sure, is very familiar with the fact that our
At first, I thought, you know, it is not being entrepreneurship. It's not being put forward here. I dislike that. Then I think about the reality of the situation is that, yeah, I mean, you got to do this because that's just the current condition. But the fact that people don't want to talk about uh, making people entrepreneur, meaning getting rid of their severance payment possibility, um, really bothered, you know, that people have given up to the submission of the world to logic.
our revenue coming in based on payroll taxes on earnings rise directly with wage growth over time. But after somebody first becomes eligible for benefits, their benefits go up only by prices. So the degree of positive real productivity and wage growth is really, really an important factor. Just a couple things by way of thinking about all of this that we want to offer that are much in our minds. Uh, this being the ratio of employment to population. A remarkable thing here is the dramatic and rapid increase back in the ratio of employment to population. This is on an age sex adjusted basis after the most recent 2020 recession, as compared to the much more gradual increase we had after the last recession. Uh, Speaking to the changing age distribution of the population, you can see this graph that we have used many, many times here. You can see between 1970 and 1990, the shrinking share of the working age population between 25 and 64 that was between 45 and 64. So those were good times for disability benefits. And you can see then what happened between 1990 and 2010. Not a big surprise that disability benefits began to rise.
So I'm aware that I am not popular. So even though I have talked about these things in my previous video, let me talk about this again. Instead of minimum wage, let's have not selling things below the cost. And the cost would also include, why not, intellectual property. And intellectual property should include things that are not included in the intellectual property, but it's fair to be included.
Relative to earnings as the 45 to 64 share of working age became bigger and bigger in the future. The big change is going to be that for the adult population, more and more are going to be over 65, relatively less as workers and more as consumers, and that will change the pattern of demand. Another factor is the employment over 65, and you can see on this interesting set of graphs, men on the left and women on the right.
Male ratio of civilian employment to non-institutionalized, non-incarcerated population, or civilian entrepreneurship versus big company. I don't really get it. Can someone point it out? Female ratio of civilian employment to non-institutionalized population is, are we talking about jail versus non-jail, or are we talking about entrepreneurship versus um, um, uh, employment?
You can see that the greatest increase in employment rates have been over 60, and especially over 65, much less so under 59 and under 54. And that appears to be a continuing factor into the future. Love the old comment from Paul Samuelson that the best retirement approach is a job. Another factor that has really been changing is the nature of employment.
The that is rather unfortunate, right? Because the best employ retirement plan should be royalties.
We can see between 2010 and 2019 in particular, pre-pandemic, that we had dramatic shifts in the distribution of the workforce by the type of occupation. This again is not by the employer, but by the actual occupation. Much more shift towards the kind of work that most of us do: management, business, financial, professional related, and much less growth in areas that are probably more subject to lower income and higher possibility of disability, as per the last presentations. Uh, Another factor, of course, then, which is going to play into, given productivity, what's going to happen in earnings levels is labor's share of GDP. And we can see that labor share of GDP has been lower recently and has been generally sort of trending down. We are projecting that it having come up in the 2020 recession, but dropping somewhat since then in the most recent 2022 trustees report, that it will be coming back up to about 63%, less than it used to be back in the 1970s and before. Uh,
I think there's a upside of reducing labor percentage in GDP, which means like I wish like the a lot of entrepreneurship, single person entrepreneurship contributes to GDP. Wow, isn't it? Wow, what a great thing. Uh, Regrettably speaking, it spikes up again. Um, that is it's not that unexpected because comfort zones are not easy to change. Um, but what in the future what we should tackle is actually this dependence upon um, what do you say, I don't know, like how would you talk about this without being too mean, but but a lot of problems would come from this, and I wish people would just have a sustainable normal, like you would have a foundation that is based on sand, and when the sand crumbles, everyone's gonna blame the government, everyone's gonna blame the rich people, and all that stuff. While if they knew what exactly made a foundation sand and made a foundation of rock, they would understood and expected about the burst of the bubble, and they would actually have a better life and better planning and more preparedness to work. And also people who who already knew about that to begin with would have more potential peers to work together with, rather than being rather than having to live in their own jail of common sense, which is actually not wrong. um, that they could not find their break, their well-deserving break, because people are just not relating to it, and that's where the money and property came from, right? Like the consensus, the value of money is a consensus, and your land certificate is valid because of the validity of the people. I mean, that side of the people are good, but come on, we gotta expand the territory of goodness right here and not be content with assuming when we make graphs and charts of the people of the economy that their behaviors would be like an animal, right? Or a robot. And and I should say that we should say we should say what the problem is. We should share, because not everyone are economists. Like the law is being shared as a public domain, we should share our economic knowledge. I know we get it in an expensive manner, and we deserve that rewards, and we're not gonna get it. However, if people would understand the logic, they would also have to understand that what are the things that needs to be rewarded. I don't know, man. Guys, let's continue on.
But this, of course, would be a major factor in translating from productivity into earnings levels. One of the factors related to cyclicality is the oft observed notion that when we have a recession, especially a bad recession, we tend to lose not only temporarily, but maybe permanently something in terms of the level of GDP and productivity. We have a downward level shift, and you can see what we had back in the 2010 trustees report just before the Great Recession of 2007 through 9 being reflected. We had a trend projection up in potential GDP, but by the 2020, 21, and 22 trustees reports, we were operating at substantial levels of potential GDP, and this is really because of lower realized productivity largely. You can see for the 2021 trustees report, we assumed a little extra drop off from the most recent recession, but we pulled back on that given the very dramatic strength of recovery to this point that we've had since the 2020 recession. Interesting other point relative to just the employment to population, much observed is that we sort of recoiled a little bit against the discussion of the great resignation and think it's a little bit more in recent times as the great churning of jobs. You can see that while the employment to population ratio dropped in the recession, but has come back strongly, the quits rate, that is the voluntary quits rate, leaving a job that is indicated by the Fed, has moved up to dramatically high levels in absolute terms, and especially in relation to the employment to population. So it's just another indication of the very strong demand for jobs now relative to the number of labor force that are really ready to go. And so we will see how this goes in the future, whether this be persistent or not. On labor productivity growth in particular, this is just another illustration of how back through the 1970s, we had somewhat higher levels in general, but we have had lower levels. The little dash black line shows you what the 20-year moving average is, and it has been meandering around. This is, by the way, total economy, labor productivity that is indicated here. And you can see the 20-year average has actually trended down more towards like about 1.5%. We are assuming about a 1.63% ultimate in the future. The question is, will we get back up to that? Will we be lower, or will we rise back up to the level of the 1970s?
It is really like I am bothered uh with the tendency to like the rest or the sanctuary, being set upon labor numbers that you want as high labor as possible. That is unsettling. That is so unsettling. That is not gonna solve the problem. I What we want, which is further than that, is that everyone would be living relative to sellers. um yeah, because entrepreneurs or companies are living relative to sellers, and it is not actually realistic to live paycheck to paycheck be- at fixed amount, because customers are free to come and go. And what's going to happen in the future is, if we kept on having this sense of comfort, unhealthy sense of comfort, we're gonna have policies that's going to lock customers to a certain vendors. So it would be an extra expensive to for you to move to a different to a competition. But look, hear me out, because I also proposed for that, in terms of like, if you come to a different country and you have to pay a higher price because your presence would kind of disturb the equilibrium of the supply chain, right? And it is an extra cost for the one that have to deal with it, whoever that would be. different settings probably would have different people that would be dealing with that. It is that's the point of view, but again, I just it is putting your egg in one basket. You want to be able to be free to put eggs at different basket, even if you have to pay a higher price. But and inherently, I think a lot of economy is already doing that, for one reason or the other. But I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about like a policy being made by whoever it is that is powerful, using the wrong logic or using the wrong reason to lock you in into a certain companies that is that would allow for coercion to be put in play for the sake of that. I mean, that's my concern. That's uh, not the worst that it could go, but it could go there, and we don't want that. So don't have this false sense of security where fixed job or fixed place of work is actually a done deal, or a good place to be, because you would want what you want is actually having finished your job that was budgeted 9 hours for you. You could finish it in 2 hours, go back home and do other things for your family, or maybe do other jobs, and still get the same pay without being reduced, without the risk of being reduced again in the future. You know what I mean? Isn't that nice?
Finally, we have a table here, not all of which we will try to absorb here in this short amount of time, but do want to indicate, and I don't know whether the little arrow on my mouse cursor is showing up, but we would probably put our most emphasis here on the non-farm business sector, which is where we see most of the attention paid by private forecasters. And you can see over the last 25 years and over the last 65 years for non-farm business sector, we have been at about 2% average annual rate of growth. And that is actually, if you look down to the bottom of that column, that is what we're assuming the 2022 trustees report and have for quite a while as the rate of growth for the non-farm business sector. So that's where we're at this point. The question is that our most appropriate assumption for the future? Again, very, very close to what we've had over the past 25 or 65 years. And where are we actually going to be working with all the changes that are happening in the composition of our labor force and jobs? So future course, will ultimate total growth in total economy labor productivity average about the 1.63% that we have been assuming in our trustees report? And similarly, will the ultimate growth rate in non-farm business productivity continue to be at around the 2% that we've observed over longer periods? Or should we expect a possibility of better or worse than that? So those are really the questions we're happy to pose. And Jim, again, thank you so much for the opportunity to come and make this presentation. We really appreciate it. It's super helpful to be able to join with you all on this.
So thanks very much. I wanted to start just with kind of a quick reminder of how growth economists sort of.
All right, so the presenter is Mr. Steve Goss. Thank you very much for the presentation. Will ultimate growth in total economy labor productivity average 1.6% per trustees intermediate assumptions, with ultimate growth in NFB productivity at around 2%. To be honest with you, I don't understand what is NFB and what is the labor productivity, that how's that being compared. I guess probably they already have some answers to my concerns, and I was just being an idiot. But let me see. Uh, Long run trend forecast for period 1.93%. Ultimate assumed annual growth in productivity by component. And but then what does this imply? What kind of policy are we talking about? Because we're gonna have competition from Vietnam, maybe, or from the rising Indonesia. something like that. And it's going to change again this GDP, or maybe from Africa. But again, when something is being done more efficiently, it would enable you to do other things. Uh, and also, I think you like you would want to point out to the ingenuity of the thing, because you would want to point out previously this is the cost of doing it, and then after that we are able to bring it down to this number. And the fact that you could copy us and do the same, uh like maybe you shouldn't compete with the price, because if you put the price much lower, meaning you're not paying something to the people that we were paying for. That means we have been paying for this ingenuity, and you are not paying for this ingenuity. That's why you could sell it cheaper. Is it yes or no? I know you are very hardworking and very efficient and whatsoever. How many of that contributes to the lowering of the price? How many of that came from you not expending the cost that is fair? And that is also the issue that has been talked about for a long time, and a lot of people have already addressed that. But it's not over yet, right? It's not concluded, and there are no policy. And we see the intellectual property law actually, I mean, maybe it's not being solved through intellectual property law, but it is an intellectual property that could be acknowledged in us in one way or the other. So back again to the concern right here. I'm going too far off. uh, what is this percentage we are talking about? Forecast 1.62 and 1.9%. Um, I'm actually would be talking gibberish if I don't really understand it. Ratio of employment to population, labor. So is that it? Isn't that a bad thing? Like,
going to be working with you with all the changes that are happening in the composition of our labor force and jobs. So future course will ultimate total growth in total economy labor productivity average about the 1.63% that we have been assuming in our trustees report. And similarly, will the ultimate growth rate in non-farm business productivity
if the productivity came from all the people, all the entrepreneurs, closing their businesses, went and becoming the labor, is would that increase this ratio? If that's so, we don't want that. I know that it should be if laborers increase their productivity compared to the entrepreneurs, this would also increase this ratio. But if that's true, am I getting this ratio wrong? Why would anyone want to increase this percentage? Why would anyone want to increase this percentage?
continue to be at around the 2% that we've
Maybe I'm
observed
wrong.
over longer periods?
Think
Or
I'm
should we
wrong.
expect the possibility of better or worse than that? So those are really the questions we're happy to pose. And Jim, again, thank you so much for the opportunity. Really appreciate this.
How growth economists sort of think about the sources of growth and go back to sort of Paul Romer's key insight, responsible for his Nobel Prize. So Romer said it's really important to separate the things in the economy into objects versus ideas. And objects are everything we study in economics, everything that underlies Adam Smith's invisible hand. And think about, a computer is a classic example of an object. If you add one computer to the economy, you make one worker more productive. And if you want to make 1 million workers more productive that same way, you need 1 million computers. And so this kind of underlies our, typical solo style production function, that output per worker depends on the number of computers per worker. And that's, underlying all these productivity kind of calculations. Romer pointed out that ideas are different. And in particular, ideas are non-rival, or I like to call it infinitely usable. So if you add one computer to the economy, you make one worker more productive. If you add one new idea, though, because those ideas are infinitely usable, they can make an unlimited number of people more productive or better off. So think about a cure for lung cancer, drought-resistant seeds, or a spreadsheet, or just the COVID vaccine is the classic example now. You invent it once, and then potentially 7 or 8 billion people can benefit from that technology. And so what this means is that income per person depends on the aggregate stock of knowledge, not on the number of ideas per person, right? With capital or with any object, it's, objects per person, but because the ideas are infinitely usable, income per person depends on the aggregate stock of knowledge. And what's important about that is that it's easy to make aggregates grow. Solow taught us you can get aggregate growth through population growth. And so that's going to link to some of the things I'm going to say later. And so in these idea-driven growth models, population growth plays a key role because more people means more ideas, just like more auto workers means you make more cars. There's nothing special in this view about the idea production function. More people means more ideas, but because those ideas are infinitely usable, more ideas means higher income per person. And so more people is tied to income per person through this non-rivalry of ideas. Okay, so with this kind of framework, I sort of did a back of the envelope growth accounting from the 1950s to today.
But also there's this issue where the ideas that are usable to the one who has the most money is not all of the ideas. So if you are poor, maybe you can use all of these ideas. Maybe you would want to pay for all of these ideas, um, but you don't have the money. But if the people who has all the money, there's a limit to a human being's time, and they're not going to absorb all of the things. And maybe it's really hard also to allocate the meritocracy of it. That's quite a big issue that could go to the infinity. So I mean, I don't want to be communistic, right? I don't want people to think of me as a communist. I'm a I'm for meritocracy, okay? And exactly the reason why meritocracy is not like that, guys. Exactly the reason why monopoly is for communists instead of for meritocracy, okay? So if you say that my ideas are communistic because it's for equality, it's not like that. It's different because robbery is not the same as equal rights in front of the law, right? And my ideas is also not robbery. There are things that are like that, guys.
And if you think about GDP per person growth averaging around 2% per year over this period, where does it come from? And I'm going to do it a little bit differently from the way it's usually done. I'm going to talk about the capital output ratio, which it hasn't grown at all. So there's sort of 0% of our growth comes from the capital output ratio over this period. Human capital per person, namely here measured by educational attainment, is a big part of what's been going on. And, Claudia Golden and Larry Katz had this beautiful work looking at a century of growth in educational attainment and pointed out that basically over this period, the adult labor force has added about a year of education every decade. And labor economists tell us that each year adds about, say, 5, 6, or 7% to your wage. And so each decade, we're adding 5% to the wages of people in the US economy through rising educational attainment. Well, if each decade we're adding 5%, each year we're adding 0.5%.
Yeah, but with the increase of education, you would say it would be an increase with money, but then inflation entails less ability to do with that with all of those money. I mean, guys, I wish the education would be economic education, and you would be able to say, "Oh, dude, you've been doing a lot for me. I would be doing a lot for you, but I just don't have the money. Let's do it with securities that we make ourselves, like a security, like a debt, like a bond, something like a bond. But you know what? If it is an exchange of goods and services that is not using the money of the country to the people that wouldn't otherwise be, yeah, that was whose transaction is facilitated by the safety of the country, you would argue that police and the army would want to claim some of that. or the security is due to the insurance of the firefighters. Also, the state would want, or the local government would probably want some of that as well. um, I mean, if you're not using money, probably you're not going to allocate the budget for that. But we could allocate the budget for that, right? The problem is the way the money works is, people would perform really really well and they would get a lot of money, but it doesn't mean that the potential of GDP is lost from those who didn't have the money. So um, when they don't have the money and they could not find a job because they haven't invested enough to become a professor or obtain all of these certificates, or maybe being favored by the agencies of public relations and the marketing people, they wouldn't get the money. But if they could issue this, they could kind of employ other people that they, without using money. But I mean, I'm not saying that you should rebel against the country, of course, but I'm just saying all of this wasted potential, you know is not being used, and it could still be, let's say, why would you do anything without being paid? That's that's a that's an argument. But what if you can get paid without the money of the country? That's one point, but that's not just that. But let us just continue on, guys, because um, we're gonna get distracted too much.
So about 0.5% per year of this 2% growth, so a quarter of our growth, is due to rising educational attainment historically. Rising employment population ratio, especially with female labor force participation, is another important part here, about 0.2 percentage points. And that leaves the residual of TFP growth as 1.3 percentage points. And this may be a little higher than you're used to seeing because I'm doing it in labor augmenting units rather than the Hicks neutral units. That way you can think about what the long run growth rate would be. If you then use an idea model to break out where does the 1.3 percentage points of TFP growth come from, you get some interesting things. So the first thing to say is this misallocation term. I sort of made up this number of 0.3 percentage points based on this work that I did with Cheng Shea, Pete Polino, and Eric Hurst, where we looked at the allocation of talent and sort of the Sandra Day O'Connor, Jennifer Doudna kind of point that women are increasingly being allocated to jobs where their comparative advantage lies. And so that's an improvement in the allocation of talent and has raised productivity growth. And in that paper, we estimated about 0.3 percentage points. There are other sources of misallocation. So this is just one of them. That leaves 1 percentage point of productivity growth to be due to increases in research effort. And when you break the research effort into research intensity, like the fraction of the labor force engaged.
Okay, we're talking about putting the right people at the right place. So that means like people like Elon Musk or Bill Gates or Warren Buffett should pay expensive money for the service of the best kind of people. That would be the solution to distribute power. But I think like, you want to be you don't want an economy that relies people being patronized or being micromanaged for being very rich. You want an economy that rewarded people who are extremely rich with the freedom to be extremely rich, with the proper freedom of being extremely rich. So they should be able to not spend their money, and not spend their money in expensive stuff, including, for example, Mark Zuckerberg always uses the same kind of outfit every day. So that would be very efficient. And why would anyone want to frown upon that? And uh, and what I'm missing another point, right? Because I'm being emotional. I need to control my blood pressure because probably it affects memory as well. Whew, what to say? Uh, Plus, maybe these very rich people has experiences with nature that would make them have a high immunity to maybe like cheap stuff. Like they could drink or they could eat food that are less hygienic, and it actually make them more healthy, more stronger. And it's cheap. It's fine, isn't it? And isn't it more enriching for them? That's proper richness, that if they are free to do that. But the solution is, it could be that, but it's not. We shouldn't rely on it 100%. That's what I'm saying. Which what we should rely upon is the local dynamism, that there's an extra value in having a community. But also, we don't want people to regulate that. Like, there's a difference between giving charity to people than being forced to give charity to people. So if you have a community, right, that is dear to you, and you would have an economy of preference to them, even though the quality of the goods and services from the popular standard is the same or even worse, but there are extra value that they couldn't see, and that is something that's going to help the absorption of currencies inside the economy.
in research versus just population growth, you get about a 2-to-1 split here. And so it turns out that of this, last 1 percentage point, about 0.3 percentage points is due to population growth, and 0.7 percentage points is due to rising research intensity. Now, what's interesting about that is in the quick description of the model I gave you, in the long run, all of these things disappear except this contribution from population growth. And so, at least the way I've set it up, educational attainment's not going to keep rising forever. Certainly, the fraction of your lifetime you spend in school is bounded. The employment population ratio is bounded. And so, in the long run, in this framework, all of growth is due to this population growth component. But interestingly, even in that framework, historically, more than 80% of growth is due to these other factors. Now, what's interesting about that, as I pointed out, is that these other factors are transitory. Rising educational attainment, rising labor force participation, declining misallocation, rising research intensity. In the long run, those things can't contribute to growth because they're bounded. And so the long run component of growth in this accounting is really just the 0.3 percentage points, much, much smaller than the 2 percentage points we've seen for more than 100 years. And so the implication is, unless something changes, growth has to slow down quite considerably someday. Now, how soon is someday is an interesting question. So I wanted to structure the rest of my comments about why future growth might be slower, and then why it might not be slower, and what some uncertainties are. So the first reason why it might be slower is this growth accounting I just presented. A second reason is, our idea is getting increasingly hard to find. And in particular, so the numbers that Steve just showed us, per capita GDP growth, productivity growth, these kind of things have slowed down a lot in the last.
Okay, let me repeat that again. This is interesting. Thank you very much, Mr. Chad Jones, for this. So, is this statistical or is this causal? Or is this correlation or is it causation? Even in a semi-endogenous growth framework where all LR growth is, what is that, gamma n, is that, am I wrong about that? Other factors explain more than 80% of historical growth. Transitory factors have been very important, but all must end. Rising educational attainment, like certification now is very expensive. Previously, you just have to be a bachelor to be viable at work, but now bachelors get minimum wage. Rising educational attainment, rising LF participation, declining misallocation. Am I right? Is this what you mean? Increasing research intensity. Yeah, because of entropy of complex system, it's very easy to increase. And therefore, a lot of ideas are being rejected because a lot of things needs to go well together with them. Implication, unless something changes, growth must slow down the long growth rate. So this is why you should go to the outskirts of the country instead of trying to be in the center of the city all the time. Growth accounting exercise just presented are ideas getting increasingly hard to find. Ideas are a lot. However, again, that synchronicity is getting harder and harder due to due to the enormity of the system. Per capita GDP growth 2003 and 2018 slowed to 1.1, and slowdown in the growth rate of research funding for basic research, slowing population growth. But again, the solution of this is actually going to a new area. And I think if like 1 million have a consensus to go to build up a new area all at once, because you don't want to invade, a village and change everything about their lifestyle. That would be not very, very not nice. But it is, don't you think it's possible where we could start a new city? Maybe it is expensive to move. I know. I just saw this accounting finance audit channel, um, where a very mean guy with glasses berating people too for being stupid about their finances. He interviewed a person and talked about how expensive it is to move. He himself got a very good price, but not everybody got a very good price to move. But I would say like maybe it could be mitigated by having a furniture renting or second furniture, some kind of consignment schemes, or maybe we you would have a warehouse, but you don't have to move. You could rent at the beginning, maybe. But again, like, it is imperative, guys, because initially the economy were designed as a free market. And if a free market has reached a saturation, the competition would arise, and the competition would be new cities. But the problem is now is that we due to, I'm sorry to say, credit, right? People would want to repay their credit. Therefore, people are being unofficially, semi allocated to each other in a, like, because if they're gone, that means credit repayability would be a problem. And that might have some motives to prevent that from happening. But again, that would also cause our situation where people are not where the free market of location is really, really hard. It's really, really hard. And now, what are there are other points that I want to get into as well. The future growth. So yeah, it's not that ideas are really hard, but it's just that the ideas that
Certainties
matches
are.
the
So the
complexity
first reason
is
why it might
getting
be slower is this growth
more
accounting I
and more
just presented.
scarce.
A second reason is, our ideas getting increasingly hard to find. And in particular, some of the numbers that Steve just showed us, per capita GDP growth, productivity growth, these kind of things have slowed down a lot in the last two decades. So 2003 to 2018, before the pandemic, instead of 2% growth in GDP per person, we were almost half that. And then the next 3 points I want to make, I have some slides for, so let me turn to those. But slowing, other sources of slowdown. So I mentioned that rising research effort in these idea models, where do you get growth? You get it from throwing researchers at these problems. And the growth rate of the research effort is really the key source of long-run growth. Well, if you look at the growth rate of research effort around the world, it's slowed down. So the world number slows a little bit, the OECD number slows quite a bit more, and the US number slows quite a bit as well. Maybe it's slowed by about a factor of a third. And so we're not throwing resources at these problems the same way we were in the past, and maybe that's related to the slower growth we're seeing. Another interesting point, here's what fraction of investment is in these infinitely usable kind of things, the intellectual property products. And this is broken down into software and entertainment, which I don't want to emphasize today, and then R&D. And the interesting thing when you look at the R&D numbers that you're probably all aware of is that the total amount of R&D in the U.S. as a share of GDP has been pretty stable, around 2.8 or 3% per year. But the composition's really shifted. It's shifted away from government-funded R&D into privately funded R&D. And you might think, maybe that's a good thing. Maybe the more the private sector does, the better. On the other hand, if you have a pipeline view of R&D, which is the government funds the basic research and the private sector commercializes the innovations that come from the basic research, you might be worried that somehow our pipeline isn't what it used to be. And I think it's an open question how large that effect is, but certainly when you look at the data, this kind of thing jumps out at you. Another thing I want to emphasize that I only appreciated recently is
disclaimer, guys, just because I'm very emotional about this, it doesn't mean that I'm already comprehensive. I think it's even like missing pieces from this very video itself is something that I still have to learn more.
Is not only is population growth slowing down, which kind of everyone knows, but in fact it's slowing in a way that's stronger than you might have thought. I would have guessed 10 years ago that global population was going to level off at some number like 10 billion people or something. I'm not so sure that's true anymore. And there's this nice book by Bricker and Ibbotson called The Empty Planet. And what it points out is that all around the world, fertility rates are falling and they just shoot through 2 or 2.1. If you think, women on average need to have 2.1 kids per woman in order to keep population stable. Well, it turns out as countries get rich, they just shoot right through the 2 and go down to some number.
That's why you guys, the wealth, because few people are gonna get all the money, and for those who didn't have the security for their children, they're gonna think ahead. Unless irresponsible people are gonna go for it, and they're gonna have a lot of kids, and probably in the future, it's going to be, unless we have a very good wall, a very good property, the problem is going to be average for those who are trying to be responsible. Leave that aside. Internally, how are you going to deal with this? How do we reward these responsible people so that they would make kids more? They would be more daring to have children, and it is something that I still am searching for, or I'm not exactly searching for, but I think it is something that I haven't dared to talk about.
Numbers like 1.3 or 1.4 or 1.7, which is kind of what you can see here. What's interesting is at the microeconomic level, there's nothing special about above 2 or below 2. Fertility falls 5, 4, 3, 2, and less. There's nothing special at the micro level, but at the macro level, it's absolutely crucial, because whether population stabilizes or grows or declines depends on that in a critical way. And so our standard growth models just assume positive population growth. And you get this view of the world that we get exponential growth in incomes because of the ideas that these rising number of people produce for an exponentially growing population. And that's a pretty nice view of the world. On the other hand, it turns out if population growth is negative, so that the level of population starts declining, you get a much, much more pessimistic view of the future, which is living standards stagnate, growth comes to an end, and the population vanishes. And so, the fact that...
So the problem also is the older population is not going to want to move. They already have properties. They don't want to move. But the young people who's supposed to be carrying the economy, the system wants them to move. The free market wants them to move, and that is being left alone is a psychologically huge. There's a huge psychological barrier, economically speaking, against that. There's a behavioral, I don't know, like there are no evidence. I'm talking without evidence, but I would imagine due to culture, you're gonna have a huge barrier when the stakes are the well-being of the older people. Whew, that is cringe, isn't it?
This is what the data look like, make me, somewhat nervous about what the future of growth looks like, other things equal. Okay, why might growth not slow down so soon? I think the finding lost Einsteins is really an important point, and it's got several dimensions. So the way I like to think about it is how many Edison's endowedness have we missed out on historically for various reasons? And one of those key reasons is the rise of China and India and other emerging markets, right? So China and India each have as many people as the US, Europe, and Japan put together, more.
I think a big factor to this is also integrity. Are these geniuses are being having a inherently deep value of integrity or justice? That is what's gonna be cringe for the future, because you cannot just take geniuses and then give them the all of the freedom to create weapons, right? And then thought everything would be safer. Maybe it's not. Maybe it's not safer. And are you gonna say, oh, so it's legal or it is nice to block people's potential? You, of course not. But of course not. The problem is, is it immoral? Is it immoral actually to do that for the sake of protecting morality? Right. I think the answer for simply speaking from that point of view, the answer is too obvious. But there are nuances whereas the act of blocking potential itself is blocking potential. Therefore, that is immoral too. Um, So honesty is the really, guys. Why do we have all of this difficulty, guys? It's not supposed to be that difficult. If you're a liar, fuck your shit, right? If you're not a liar, then go ahead, you know. But because everyone is just so dear. Oh, white lies. I love you, white lies. So so we have to go around it. I have to you have to think about an innovation to go around all of this unnecessary administration in order to cater to your sentiment to do white lies, guys. I don't know, guys. I don't. Is it applies universally like that? That's what I believe. But again, please consider me as one person, not a million person. Okay.
More than a billion. And so, in 1980, those economies were too poor to be pushing the global frontier forward. But in the last, 20, 30, 40 years, we've seen economic growth take hold. And increasingly, those economies are producing innovations that push the global frontier forward. So that's kind of, another 2 billion people that we can potentially use to throw at these hard idea problems. A student at Stanford, Jean-Felix Bruyette, pointed out that only 3% of inventors were women in 1976, and in 2016 that number is still only 12%. So again, how many Jennifer Doudnas are we missing out from this misallocation of talent? And Bell, Chetty, Van Reenen, Jeraval et al., I'm missing someone I'm sure, point out the same thing applies to poor talented people. So there's all this talent that we're not taking sufficient advantage of. So by improving the allocation of talent, could we increase the amount of research by a factor of 3 or 7, plausible over the next century? How big of an effect on growth would that have? It's actually surprisingly small, I think, when you look at it. So a really key parameter in all these models is how large is the non-rivalry of ideas, and how large is the increasing returns associated with that. I think some number like a third is not crazy, although it's hard to know. In that case, this sort of tripling the research effort would only raise incomes in the long run by 40%. A 7-fold increase in research effort would only raise incomes in the long run by 90%. And so if you convert that to an annual growth rate for a century, you can raise growth by 0.3% or 0.6% maybe, but it's not a huge change on the other hand. Okay, another reason why growth could be faster, this is completely speculative, is automation and artificial intelligence. So we're seeing this in the last decade becoming increasingly important. Oh, I know I need this.
Okay, automation of artificial intelligence is going to give security to the productivity of rich people, right? Unless poor people want to have their own economy with the help of AI, like for example, planting food more efficiently using AI, plant your own food. Yeah, don't rely on the market. Yeah, because market has already been attached to the money. Yeah, if you don't have the money, so plant your own food so that you would have more freedom, guys. Okay, and then use AI for it. Then it would be very efficient. If everyone have this resiliency, then AI would be good. But for those who didn't notice, Chat GPT is not as good as it was promised to be. Did you remember? Have you ever tried Chat GPT? It's like a robot. No, it's not, guys. The technology is already there. I don't think Chat GPT is that bad, guys. It's just that, oh shit, it's too good. It's dangerous, I think. Okay. I think like all of these concerns that the tech people they were not hyping up. They were not hyping up their AI. I'm not well, they might be hyping up their AI so that everyone would jump into it. But if you see if you see into the way it works, right? It's the a lot of its suckiness, a lot of its bad quality is artificial instead of the other way around. Instead of its incapability. Is it because of the rendering resources needed, or is it because either way, guys, AI is very, very good for those who wanted to be independent. And for status quo, for example, using AI would improve the efficiency of what's already exists, and it would alienate a lot of people. And the solution would be all of these other people also should use AI. In what way? Yeah, I think if you're not familiar with AI, you don't really have to use AI if you could plant your own food. However, it is your lifestyle wouldn't be as free as what the current technology allows to. However, the current technology is a property of other people. You wouldn't have to think about it also. I think um it's not like I'm saying useless thing right now, using wasting your time. I don't want to waste your time by saying this, but it's just that um what am I going to say? AI, is it going to solve your problem when it is said that it's going to solve the economy's problem? Is it going to solve your problem to say that, oh, therefore I must be an employee, therefore the benefit that comes to the company is going to go to me because I'm part of the company? Now that is making the company a government, don't you think? Because now the company is not for profit anymore, right? Because is it profitable to have you around when we already have AI? Now it's a government. So a government is nice, right? It doesn't profit oriented. Like if a company have a slave that works 24 hours, right? As compared to having three people working at different shifts, they could pay the same amount of salary. You wanna argue a company would be the government of the future, but really I have a problem with that because a company is not accountable to the people's well-being. A company is there to make profit. And you would want to say, oh, if people's well-being were being ignored, how could one make profit? Because profit came from the money of the people, or the goods and services provided by the people. um, if people are not needed, they could just live independently with all of the AIs that they have made, and they could be an introvert without needing any other people around. um, Therefore, the fact that they are not doing that shows that people are imperative to profit, and therefore companies would want everybody to realize their high tier of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, uh, because it supports profitability. And I think there's a lot of things being skipped with that argument, because again, do you really need people realize their potential to have the best profitability? Um, and how about competition, right? How about the inclination to eradicate your competition? What we are having right now is not the order to not sell below cost. In fact, what has been practiced is everyone is selling below cost with their free to access services. Therefore, they acquire monopoly. That's what had been happening. I know inside now people exchange of information made that less of a unethical, because everyone shares with everybody. In a sense, that is also kind of that is still moral, that's still valid as a just thing to a degree, but not always, right? Not all the time, not everything is like that, and not everything have to work like that. It's just that no one gives their own perspective of what's happening. And if everyone comes together under this context, maybe we would have more objective views instead of just assumption of what's going on. And I couldn't really say about what's going on without seeing the data. I could only estimate, right? um, However, still, you cannot say that, okay, this is the solution. I don't think I don't think you um I wouldn't believe that. I wouldn't believe that that's a done deal.
Stop soon. I'll have two more slides, I think. In simple models, automation can raise the growth rate or even lead to sort of explosive growth. What if machines can produce ideas and we don't need people? Importantly, we've had centuries of automation and they haven't sped up growth. And so I think probably those simple models are too optimistic, although there's lots of interesting work to be done there. Uncertainty, long and variable lags. You look at the breakthrough patents, and the 1950s and 60s were the best decades for growth in the 20th century, and they don't stand out as being special from patents. And in fact, the 1930s was the best decade for innovation up until recently. So I think this long and variable lag view is really important. Uncertainties about the shape of the future idea production function. I think if you look at the past, a view that ideas are getting harder to find, and they've always been getting harder to find, is kind of the right view of the past. But there's no reason the past has to be a good guide to the future. In the interest of time, I won't go through these scenarios and why they make sense or not, but the future could be different. Maybe we're going to invent some great new idea that's going to cause things to take off, or maybe we're going to run out of ideas. It's sort of hard to know.
Okay, so even now, if you want to be honest, if you want to make government work right, it's already inherent in the government itself that it is unethical to give too much credit to the people who don't deserve it, or to the potential that is not there. But no one is actually going to stop you. Like everyone advised for house credit. Like if you want to buy a house, everyone's just going to take it from the bank. It's going to go to the bank. No one is stopping, not even the government. Well, I think if government is do have integrity, they would put a barrier to that. They would put a line where, oh, it's already saturated, right? And I think that's the responsible thing to do for a government. And and where can I see a business do that? That is not their business. Like companies, multinational companies, it's not their business to do that. yeah, it will destroy the market, therefore destroy their potential for profit in the future. That's why they would want to do that. I don't know, but if fewer people were around, but all of these few people are rich people, uh, I would want to deal only with these rich people in a way. And um, like there's an illusion there also, uh, which is not how would the financial statement is going to reflect or whether or not these owners of the company subscribe to the illusion or not. Because if it's profitable, it's profitable.
Okay, so just to conclude, this is my favorite picture in all of economics. You can see the 2% growth for the last 150 years in GDP per person. And so that always makes me a little skittish in saying, well, growth could slow down or speed up. For 150 years, it's been pretty close to 2. And so at some level, 2 is not a crazy bet to make. On the other hand, there's nothing in the economics that says 2 is a law of nature. And when you look at it, I think the preponderance of the evidence suggests slowing down is maybe more likely than speeding up. So I think, Stephen, in terms of the numbers you showed, if I were looking at total economy, labor productivity, I think the main thing I would do that is important is just consider some heterogeneity. I think there really is a lot of uncertainty. It's not crazy to think growth could slow down to 1% per year over the next 25 years. That's what we've seen in the last, 15 years. On the other hand, artificial intelligence, machines, biotech could raise growth. 2.3, even 2.3 seems really high to me. If you took the average of these and got 1.6, that might be okay. I guess my bias would say it's more likely to be lower rather than higher. So I would put more weight on the slightly lower numbers than the high numbers. But anyway, that's what I have to say. Thank you very much.
Okay, well, I'm delighted to have the opportunity to talk to you all and actually listen to these two fascinating presentations. I'm going to take a little bit of a different tack. I will circle back to more explicit productivity issues, but what I'd like to do is focus on the relationship between gender and Social Security contributions. So as you know, earnings are what contributions are based on, and that has two components, both of which can differ by gender. Labor supply, where labor force participation is a big factor, and we talked about that in previous presentations. Labor force attachment at a point in time and over the life cycle, and earnings, wages, which are hourly earnings, and they have the closest relationship to the theme of productivity. And all of that can differ by gender. I'm going to talk about that historically and also where we may be going, though I wouldn't try to match the precision that Steve and his colleagues need to have. And then labor supply and earnings, and wages determine earnings. So I'll just look explicitly at what we know from the past about earnings and the earnings cap. And then I just want to briefly mention an issue that's kind of unique to considering gender and hasn't come up yet. But gender issues can influence the relationship between contributions and benefits. And what I have in mind here are spousal or dependent benefits. So some individuals who don't have any earnings do receive benefits based on their spouse, and those individuals are disproportionately women. Further, again, disproportionately women who have relatively low wages and intermittent participation can actually do better, even though they've made some contributions, collecting their spousal benefits, and that's called dual entitlement. So what happens over time is as women's labor supply and wages increase, they move out of these categories and into individuals whose benefits are solely dependent on their own contributions. So I'll say a few words about that. And then mention future trends. And I want to point out that trends, which hasn't come up too much yet, are dependent on policy. And I'm not talking about Social Security policy. In this case, I'm talking about policies that could influence women's labor supply and women's wages. So let's start with labor supply. And this picture is I was asked to long run trends. This is very long run from 1947 to roughly the present. And it's the labor force participation rate of the working age population. Back in the 40s, that was 14 years of age and over. It's now 16 years of age and over. And what you see here is a story that we're all very familiar with of enormous consistent growth in female labor force participation that played an important role in overall growth. But starting in the mid 1990s, this plateaued and flattened out. So we're now entering, after 50 years of growth in female participation, we're now entering 2 decades of plateau.
I think this is great what happened in the past, and I think my family is like greatly benefited from this because a lot like income from women is actually um, quite important for my well-being.
Point. I would downgrade any idea that there's an actual reduction. Yes, there's been a bit of a decrease for women, but note that it very much matches the pattern of the decrease for men over the Great Recession, over certain shifts in the age distribution, and over the pandemic. Now, why has this flattening occurred? There's no consistent, there's no consensus on what the explanation is, but there is a strong view that policy is potentially important in this, especially the role of work-family policy. Some work I did with Larry Kahn in 2013, we pointed out that the United States, since 1990, has gone from one of the leaders in women's labor force participation among the OECD countries to one of the lowest participation rates. And indeed, countries that had much lower participation rates a number of decades ago have not only caught up to us, but have surpassed us. And in our econometric analysis, it suggested that work-family policy played an important role here. But let me just back up and say what this means is we haven't necessarily hit a ceiling that we can't push beyond, because many other countries have. And the difference is partly what we found was important was their much more generous parental leave policies than the United States. Just to mention, the United States has 12 weeks of unpaid leave. We found over a year of paid leave was the average for the other countries.
Okay, so the argument of the wives of the bosses would be, they would be like, that money could have gone to me. But yeah, women needs to be at home a lot, and sponsoring that is actually going to improve their well-being. And I don't know, like if that is the strategy for your company, that is very smart of you to make it work like that. If you could make it work like that, I guess like employee well-being, there's a lot of ways to make it work, and it's going to be profitable in a sense that profit is consistently uh, uh, could also be translated as the sustainable growth rate, the real sustainable growth rate in that sense. Okay. However, however, yeah, like the evolution of men have been like guys do the dirty work, right? And we are ready, like genetically speaking, to go to war, to fight, and to do it. And women have been evolving to be housewives, and I don't think it's bad for women to be housewives. I just think it is less rich for the economy not have the point of view of the entrepreneurship of women. But also, I want to point out that a lot of leeways being given to women could be probably hurting the economy as well. So there should be a balance to that, and it is very important. It's been out of hand for some cases, and it's serious. It's a serious thing that we should consider. And if you want to say, oh, the well-being of women is actually imperative for the like for example, pregnancy leave, um, of course, but you cannot also deny that if you had men otherwise who wouldn't have that pregnancy leave, the 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 the, the immediate income that the company is going to get is going to be increased. So I guess that's where it comes in, where spousal, I don't know what to say, whether that's what she meant or not, but that includes what she meant or not, because I think part of that should be a spousal is estafette running system, where if the wife is not going to work, the husband could also somewhat cover for that. But but again, I think that's the reality of the issue, and we shouldn't make it a regulation. That yeah, and again, guys, you want to say, oh, the regulation has improved a lot. That's because it's a good thing, right? But there's a bad thing to that. If the market is free, good thing should be the trend, right? And bad thing should be ruled out by the free market. But um, but when you regulate things like that, you cannot really set aside, or the market could not really I don't know what to say, the market could not really choose the one who are who are great to begin with. That's the missing opportunity there. um, but if everyone gives women sick leave, I guess the competitive advantage would also be controlled. I always thought, um, that that would result in preference to men. If they cannot see the real benefit of giving women sick leave, then they're not really that smart to begin with, and therefore they shouldn't enjoy the competitive advantage that the one who could see it could obtain over them. Now when it is regulated, we cannot have that. I don't know, everyone do it, but so everyone is poorer together. Am I right or am I wrong? So, or everyone would outsource the ingenuity of the people who have figured it out and paid them to solve the problem.
Countries, and the generosity's increase since the 90s has played a role in those countries surpassing us. Now, one issue I'd like to return to is for parental leave, the relationship between participation, which certainly has a positive effect, and wage differentials is a little complicated. And very long parental leave policies can potentially adversely affect relative wages and productivity of those in the labor force. Alvetti and Petrangelo point to the important role of childcare, which let me say is actually in kind of a crisis right now in the United States with rising costs and lowered supplies of workers, as also being important. So another issue is how much these contributions are over the life cycle. And in some work I've done with Khan, Babashko, and Comey, I've taken these figures from there and looking first at all workers. These are gender gaps in full-time work experience, past work experience. And you see that those gaps have fallen markedly over time, both for all workers and even in the full population. That includes those currently out of the labor force. From 6.5 years in 1981 to just about a year in 2015. Now, this is important for contributions to Social Security, but it is also important for the productivity discussion. Work experience is one of the two major human capital variables that we emphasize in analyzing wages. The decline in these gaps are an indicator of the rising.
Okay, guys, so here's the thing, right? I think the competitive advantage wouldn't be in the cheap price. The competitive advantage would be in the familiarity and the serotonin, or in the favorability of the customer. Um, but we also need the customer to be rich to be able to worry about that. Okay.
Productivity of women. Of course, the other major indicator is education. And there, back in 1981, men were slightly better educated than women. Now women have actually surpassed men, not just in the United States, but in most of the developed world. So women have really enhanced their human capital, and that has shown up in their wages. And we've seen steady increases in the relative wages of women.
Guys, imagine a condition where there's a very distinct difference between businesses that are that have built a circuit of good relations with their customers and also probably their suppliers at the same time, compared to business that relies on the stupidity of the people, right? And it's going to be temporarily the stupidity of the people is going to be very, very scaled, very huge, very big. But then soon, maybe in a 3.5 years, maybe in a 3.5 years, there would like three periods, cycles of three significant changes, and half of the significant changes, it would be obvious which one is the heaven and which one is the hell, right? And then people would just emulate what the one who are in a garden would do, uh, and that would solve the problem quicker. I just part of me think like, you know what, let's get it over with. But if that causes a lot of misery, it's also something that I wouldn't want to be responsible for.
A big issue, a non-trivial issue here is that the increase, and these are wage ratios, female to male wage ratios. The increase was quite steep in the 80s and has not plateaued, but has become less sharp in the intervening years. So I don't have too much time, but I'd like to talk about analysis Larry Kahn and I did of the wage gains, because this does point to some of the factors, and particularly the rising productivity of women relative to men. So let's just start in 1980. The blue bars are just unadjusted wage ratios that we just saw. The rust bars are adjusted for major human capital factors, namely actual labor market experience and education. And then the green bars additionally control for industry, occupation, and unionism. And what you see is a story I was kind of brought up on, where adjusting for human capital gives a significant boost to women's relative wages because there were significant human capital differences. And then a further boost we get from adjusting for industry and occupation because those differences were significant. The big news when we fast forward to 2010 is how relatively unimportant the human capital component is. Women's human capital gap with men has close to closed. Again, this is a bit of a net effect because women still lag a bit in experience, but they surpass men in education. Industry and occupation are still quite important. But this is a bit misleading in the sense that there's been enormous convergence in occupations or significant occupational gains for women in managerial and professional jobs. That's kind of masked by this analysis because what we found is that women still do lag men. There's still a considerable difference in occupations and actually in industries. And also the returns to being in some predominantly male areas have gone up. So the penalty women pay for the occupational differences has gone up. Quickly, because we're interested in the cap, how are more skilled women faring? And what we found, and I'll show you some evidence of this, is that the gender wage gap has closed more slowly at the top of the wage and earnings distribution than at the middle and the bottom. So let me shift to earnings, how wages and labor supply factors have influenced earnings. And it is pretty much as we'd expect. Earnings differences between men and women have declined. The ratio's gone up more in the 80s than subsequently. In light of what I just told you about wage differences at the various ends of the distribution, we see that earnings differences have actually increased. Earnings ratios have increased more at the 10th and the median than they have at the top. And so what we see in terms of the share above the earnings cap is that, and there's first of all a huge gender disparity here. So I'd like to point out to Social Security that women have been a big resource in the sense that a very high proportion of their earnings are taxed. The gender difference has narrowed a bit, but it's still substantial, with 10% of men above the cap compared to 4%, having earnings above the cap compared to 4% of women. Spouse benefits, I'm running out of time, but I just want to point out that women contributing as workers only has solely on their own as workers are a higher share now of women receiving benefits, and I would expect that to continue to increase. So what about the future? Here again, I want to emphasize I'm just making some comments and not firm predictions. But labor force participation, it looks, after 20 years of stability, a little bit like future earnings increases are on, future participation increases are unlikely. And I noticed that Steve and Karen's model did not predict any major increases. Again, policy could play a role, work-family policy. Wages, I would say, given past progress, from the human capital domain, I don't see much further increases just because women now are 57, 58, 59, 60% of college graduates. I wouldn't expect or even want it to go further than that. And actually, I'd like to see a little bit of restoring of gender parity in that. This is recent graduates. And the human capital gap has almost disappeared. Differences in occupation and industry between men and women have more scope for progress, but the integration of occupations has slowed since the 1990s, and there's never.
Okay, I don't have a lot more things to say, but we gotta keep it fair use. So to summarize, what I think about what is bothering me um, is that yeah, the economy is moving towards inflation, and maybe it's not the benefit. It's not being distributed meritocratically the way it wants to be initially. And in order to improve on that, we got to control our credit policy in a way that you cannot give credit anymore if there are no innovation. um, and as you guys could see that the second presentation has presented, eventually where innovation is going to contribute to the system. um, Sorry, the contribution of innovation to a system over time is going to saturate. It's not that there are no innovation, it's just that the how innovation is going to augment the high entropy system is minimal. And what you want to have, I propose, is actually new areas where half of the people could go to. And in order to enable this, you got to do like what Indonesia did, what Indonesia is doing, copying what New York did with Washington. Like Washington, and now we have Canberra in Australia. Now Indonesia also want to have a new capital, and I think it is a healthy thing for the economy to do a mass new economy in a new area, not invading anyone else's spaces. I know Kalimantan or Borneo is the lung of the world. I hope they don't clear out significant forests in order to make it happen. Probably they did. I don't know, guys. I wouldn't I wouldn't jump into accusation. However, it is a good thing that people would do that, and I think people should do that more. I think it's healthy for the banks as well, because it is a sustainable income instead of bubbles. And the one who's going to benefit from the bubbles are those that are not, yeah, they just want to hit and run. You know what I mean? Why would they stay? uh, and if eventually people are not going to be able to provide anything anymore, because relationship would be broken, and the flow of goods and services therefore wouldn't be as much significantly. um, even the robbers wouldn't find too much to rob. So that's sad. Also, we don't want robbers, because I propose also that if you already become a part of goodness, probably you would like it. You know, probably it would make sense. And I would propose also people to understand that we all make mistakes. In order to make things happen, we just got to forgive. We got to figure out how to forgive. And we should reward the people who innovate on the philosophy of forgiveness, to make sense of forgiveness to people, because we don't want false forgiveness. We don't want coerced forgiveness. We want genuine forgiveness and logical forgiveness that's going to lead to a better relationship, better communication, better flow of goods and services. And yeah.
For much evidence of reduction in industry differences between men and women. Those have been quite firm. I didn't show you this in the graph, but the unexplained gap in pay between men and women, not due to human capital or occupation or industry, has not narrowed since 1990. Now, first of all, it did narrow in the 80s. What did that mean? I'd say that was an indicator of rising productivity, either due to improvement in women's unmeasured characteristics, or, as Chad in that very interesting work he mentioned, reduction in discrimination and misallocation, more fully utilizing women's abilities. But the unexplained gap has not narrowed since 1990, so it's not too optimistic there. But policy could matter, work-family policy, and especially more spending on childcare. Though given the very low levels, I'd also say parental leave in the United States could be increased and made more generous. The repeal of abortion rights in many states and possible other limitations on contraception are a concern in this regard. And just briefly, there are new anti-discrimination approaches that might have some evidence.
Yeah, if prosperity is more being more entrepreneurially sourced, and people would have diversified sources of income, that would mean that people would want to have kids, and then I would I would also argue that what was it? um, you know what was it? Wait, I lost it. Wait.
Policy, and especially more spending on childcare. Though, given the very low levels, I'd also say parental leave in the United States could be increased and made more generous. The repeal of abortion rights in many states and possible other limitations on contraception are a concern in this regard. And just briefly, there are
And I think health also would took part in that, because if people could live longer, they could be more responsible to their children. And with if people could live longer with better health, also they could enjoy their life more. They would want to have children to have a better life, because children, it is like, I as coming from someone who doesn't have children, I think it's a very positive thing to have children, but I am also scared, right? Because where would, how would I be responsible? That's the thing, really. It's not that I don't, it's not that the people, I would imagine, the people who don't want to have children doesn't appreciate the greatness of being a parent, but they just think, how am I going to account myself in face of my children, to be accountable.
new anti-discrimination approaches that might have some evidence in favor of them that might help reduce discriminatory wage gaps. And these are salary history bands and pay disparity. So thank you.
Oops. What was that? Wait. Okay. All right. Thank you guys for watching, and goodbye.